Good evening. I'm Dr. Darlene Rossetti, the Regional Superintendent of DuPage County Schools. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge all of our great educators out there. I have never been more proud to work alongside such an incredible group of individuals. Thank you for all that you do and for all that you are. So now let's get started. This is part 2 of Creating Connections During a Crisis. It's part 2 of our 3-part series. Tonight's session is titled, It Takes 2 Wings to Soar, Prioritizing Students' Social and Emotional Skills with Greg Wolcott. And it is live streamed on the DuPage ROE YouTube channel. If you missed part 1, you can find it there along with other resources. But tonight, Greg Wolcott, author of Significant 72, local and national SEL leader, is back with us, and we are absolutely delighted. But before we begin, I have a few logistical issues to take care of, and I'm going to turn this over to the Assistant Regional Superintendent, Joan Glatzbach. Joan?
Good evening. Thank you, Darlene, and thank you all for joining us for this evening's live stream. The live stream is being recorded and will be available on the DuPage ROE YouTube channel. If you have questions throughout this live stream, please email us at dupagestrong@dupageroe.org. That's DUPAGESTRONG@dupageroe.org. We will be compiling questions throughout the event that will be answered at the end of today's presentation. And now with Creating Connections During Crisis Part 2, It Takes 2 Wings to Soar, Prioritizing Student Emotional, Social, and Academic Skills, let's welcome Greg Wolcott. Greg.
Thank you, ladies. Really excited to be with you tonight and excited to talk a little bit about social emotional learning. And as Dr. Rossetti said, couldn't be more excited to talk about education, great teaching, great learning, and with everyone tonight, and to thank all the teachers around the country during this Teacher Education Week for all that they're doing during this time. And so tonight we're going to talk about relationships, and Dr. Rossetti introduced me briefly, and a little bit about this bald guy for those people who don't know me. Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning in Woodridge here in DuPage County, adjunct professor at Concordia University, consultant and author, former 1st, 3rd, and 5th grade teacher, high school and college coach, former coach, and a dad. And I'm at home in my basement, kind of hunkered up, doing my office thing, and sent the kids out for ice cream. So hopefully that'll give me some time tonight to just focus in on this. I'm going to give you a quick caution though, with what we're going to go over today. Our title is Prioritizing SEL. And so, kind of the 2 days worth of a 2-day presentation, we're going to kind of jam into 60 minutes tonight. And so hopefully, we're not going to go too deep, but hopefully you'll get the gist of things and get a good overview of things that we have to prioritize during this crisis. So why prioritize? Why focus on social emotional learning right now? I think, is our big question, and some facts that we know and about social emotional learning and the importance of it in today's educational space is, we know that the percentage of 13 through 18-year-olds that are diagnosed as having mild or moderate anxiety, 25% of the kids have that. We know that 33% is the percentage of both adults and adolescents that are suffering from anxiety. And we know anxiety is the most common mental health disorder right now in the United States. And a recent study has shown that of the people who are suffering from anxiety and depression right now, there's been a 46% increase in those turning to medication over this last 2-month period of COVID. So we know that stress and anxiety is building for so many different reasons. And we know the impact that that's going to have. 29%. This is before COVID. 29% is the percentage of 12th graders who feel so sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks in a row that they stop doing their usual activities. And that's actually from a 2016 survey in our own DuPage County. 22% of the kids at 8th grade said this, and 29% at 10th grade. So so we know that this is a tough and a very important skill for students as they're suffering like this. Sadly, we also know that 16% of the students of 10th graders and 15% of 12th graders in our area, again, who considered attempting suicide. So even prior to this crisis, there's a huge need, and we've done great things in our county, and we have to continue that. Um, with it, and we'll hit some different aspects of social emotional learning, but one of the big pieces is just that piece of an adult feeling that connection. And last week, if you saw episode 1, we talked so much about the relationships in this time of crisis and how important those relationships are ongoing. And sadly, you know, when we look at the Gallup poll, most recently 2016, when it was released, 24% of 11th graders really felt that their adults at their school care about them. And we know that, you know, we know the adults care about them. There's no doubt, but do we show students that we care about them, and are we going that extra mile to show them, and to make sure that they perceive that we care? And that's a big drop from 5th grade. But even at 5th grade, I don't think any of us are happy with that 67%. And I think one of the things that we were talking as a group about before we started today's presentation was, you know, how much reaching out there has been to students. I've received, since last week's webinar, I have received calls from dozens of school principals and teachers who've said, you know what, I've talked to every kid. You know, I had one principal tell me, you know, I have 567 kids in our school, and there's only one we haven't contacted. And you know, we've tried and tried and tried, and we finally learned that child moved during this time. You know, and it's just that extra effort. And that, I think, is something that's going to help and move us through this crisis. But again, this crisis is going to unleash in many ways some additional traumas. When we think of the ACEs studies and ACEs study and all the different adverse childhood experiences with poverty and things like that, and different types of abuse, we know that those things were high before, and unfortunately, probably going to have some additional trauma for students that come from this. And so again, it's more important now than ever that we really focus on building the social emotional learning. And I think specifically during this time of 3 kids that I've had the opportunity to work with in schools that I'm working with, and people that I know, and one is Jada, and Jada sticks out in my mind, and Jada is a 2nd grader, and she's just the sweetest little girl, so energized, so energetic. And you know, her mom called me and to talk, and her mom is an educator, and her mom called me to talk, and Jada is really struggling now with the absence from school. Now that we're not in session, Jada is really having a hard time. Jada was one of those students that was very extroverted, and you know, her her skill, her personality, her zest, her enthusiasm for learning, you know, you can, you know, her smile lights up a room, and that's what she started to become her identity when she went to school, is everybody seeing her and her just spreading that love. And she got the residual effects, or I should say the kickback effects of those relationships. And now that she's at home and doesn't have that, she's really going through some tough struggles. Another student in one of the schools we're working with is Mateo, and Mateo's a 7th grader. Mateo lives in an apartment complex with his siblings, and Mateo really is struggling right now with his anger and his frustration. You know, prior to COVID, it was a tough neighborhood for Mateo to be in that he can't leave the apartment complex at night because of safety and things. Now with COVID, it's made it really even more difficult. And then, so he struggles then having his only outlet being school. Now he struggles with being at home and just being with his siblings. And that's created a lot of anger within him. And then a third student is Becca, and Becca's a sophomore in high school, and Becca's really struggling with the fact that she is all about sports, all about athletic, all about very, just being the best in everything that she does, and was so looking forward to her track season. And now that the track season, after all the miles she put in, now her track season is canceled, and she is now beginning to lament the loss of that season that she prepared so much for, and then starting to worry as she looks ahead to the basketball season coming up in the fall, and worried about what might happen with that. And for Becca, great student, great family, but comes from a low economic background, and a free and reduced background, and so she has really counted on her athletics and her academics to potentially get her a scholarship, and so she's struggling right now. Is in her head, it's spinning. Is this going to hurt my chances? Am I not going to be able to get to school? So these kids, three kids, stick out when to me, and I want us to kind of think as we go through this presentation about those type of kids, those three kids. So we know why social emotional learning. How about how do we move forward in the right way, looking at social emotional learning? And I think the best way to look at that is to work with each child to really understand where they're coming from, how they how they are, who they are. And I use an acronym. I'm dyslexic, and I was struggled greatly until fourth grade trying to remember everything. And finally in fourth grade, my special ed teacher said, "You know what, Greg, the only way you're going to remember stuff is by coming up with acronyms." And so I create acronyms for everything, and you'll get exposed to a couple of those today. But one of the acronyms I use in my book is STORY, and the idea that every student has their strengths, every student has their tendencies, every student has opportunities, every student has resources, and every student has yearnings. And what we need to help as we think about social emotional learning is, how do we help each child? And first of all, how do we know each child's story, but how do we help each student know their own story, and realize that they are unique, that they come from, regardless of their background, that their story makes them, and that doesn't hold them back, but it makes them. And so, kind of walking through that, we start with strengths. And so, what are a student's strengths? What are those areas that the student does well, that the student chooses often to do, and what do they get energized by? I talked about Becca, and Becca being a great student, and her strengths come on the athletic field, but her I should say her strengths show up on the academic or the athletic field, but they also show up in the classroom, and it comes from her perseverance, and her quest to just always get better. And we want her to understand that that's part of who she is. And the more kids learn that they have a strength, the more quickly that strength becomes their identity. And so, ways that we can do that so that they begin looking in the mirror and seeing their own strengths. There's a couple of tools we can use. And my favorite, and this is really for students in grades third grade up, and we actually, with many of the school districts that we work with, we use this survey with adults, as part of PLCs. And so the VIAcharacter.org has developed a virtues in action character strengths test. And it's a free assessment that you can take when you go to the VIAcharacter.org website. And again, third grade on up. And what happens is you are looking at 24 different strengths that a person could have. And when you take this assessment, it rank orders those strengths from highest used, number 1, all the way down to the least used, 24. And it rank orders those. And once you have taken that test, it gives you then a printout of that order. Here's my son's. My son, his top signature, his top strengths: gratitude, prudence, creativity, curiosity, hope, leadership. Those are his top strengths. And for all people, we know when they take this assessment that, if I take it several times, my top six, my top eight strengths are pretty much always going to be my top 6 to 8 strengths. Strengths, things that I don't use as much, or maybe I'm using more in the moment, they're going to fluctuate in that bottom half. But these top six are going to be pretty consistent. And in the world of positive psychology and strengths-based education, we really call these our signature strengths. And so these are Jack's signature strengths. These are what make him help him be the amazing child that he is, my son, but also they help get him through the tough times. And so, many teachers, what they've done during the school year and have started to do during this period of COVID is to go ahead and have students take that strengths assessment. Then once students have those top signature strengths, they can look back and reflect on them. So, here was a teacher, and this is from a classroom. It was actually a third grade classroom, and the teacher had the students take the test. And what she did then, using Microsoft documents, she went ahead and had the students list out their top six strengths, those signature strengths. She calls it their circle of success. Has the students make those, put them on their desk. And what students do then is throughout the school day, she'll have them pause and look down at their circle of success and have them reflect on how they use those different things. And so, maybe today, working through their a project, they turn back and they talk about, here's how I used one of those strengths to get through the day. How did I use bravery to get through today if I was Justin? But then also the teacher saying, okay, you're going to have a really difficult task coming up. Which of those signature strengths can you use to help you get through that signature or through that tough task? So strengths become just a great way for students, again, to feel their identity, but to feel positive and control and having more control over their environment. Another tool you can use beside the BIA character survey is a free survey from Thrively, and Thrively is a great company. They have strength surveys that students can use, and free programs for students. And for the high school students, they even have a habits of mind survey to help students determine from Art Casa's habits of mind, which habits of mind are strengths of each child. And so Thrively is a great tool. There's a paid version and a regular version. Another great strength-based program is the Positivity Project. And that is another program where students, take an assessment, figure out what their strengths, and then study strengths weekly. But again, that is one of the first aspects of social emotional learning is beginning to identify who you are and having that control. T then, so S is strengths, T is tendencies. So what are the patterns or trends that a student displays? And so we want to be thinking of, what are those trends? What are those tendencies we have? There's some things we know that about all of us social emotionally, and we know all of us social emotionally. We know there's 3 aspects to our brain. The oldest part, the brain stem, that is only worried about survival and safety. And that part of the brain is just constantly asking, as you enter any situation, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? The next part of the brain is our limbic system, and that's really the emotional part of the brain. That part of the brain, because it's the emotional part, it really is all about feeling loved. So the brainstem is about, am I safe? The limbic system then is all about, am I loved? And so we're constantly, as information comes in, our brain is processing and asking those questions. Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I safe? Am I loved? This part of the brain becomes kind of that, when we're burnt out, no, or when we're frustrated, when we're worn down, which is a normal tendency, and especially in times of stress like this, our brain stays in that part right there, in that middle emotional part. And we start getting into this mental merry-go-round that we'll talk about in a minute, where we start ruminating on things. The third part of the brain then is the prefrontal cortex. And that's where the executive functioning comes. That's where all the great learning comes, the goal setting, the problem solving, where when we're able to be creative, when we're able to plan ahead and see patterns and things like that. All the great learning happens at that part in that prefrontal cortex. The challenge though is that really in this lower part of the brain, the brainstem and the limbic system, if we're not emotionally ready, doesn't matter what you're teaching, it really doesn't matter what you're teaching. You cannot access, our brain has a tendency not to be able to access that all that good part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, if we're stuck in that middle part of the brain. And so one of the challenges that we're having right now in this COVID crisis is too many people are really focusing on that prefrontal cortex and all about that prefrontal cortex. And they're not thinking about, okay, how do I get kids emotionally ready to learn? Because again, if you're not emotionally ready to learn, there's basically a gate there. You're not going through the gate to the upstairs part of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. And so one of the things that I think about is a quote from John Gordon, and John Gordon says, too many people focus on the fruit and ignore the root. And I'll go with that with the brain, and say right now that too many educators are focused on the fruit and they ignore the root. They're focused on the fruit that happens right up there in that prefrontal cortex instead of focusing really on the root, which is making sure kids feel safe, that they feel loved. Because if we can get kids feeling safe and loved, and we really focus on that root, and we help kids develop the skills that they themselves can feel safe and they feel loved, then we're going to get the fruit. The fruit will come. But if all we worry about is the fruit, there is no way we're going to get to that, because again, kids aren't going to be ready. And so another tendency we know that that's how our brain works. And so every student needs to understand that that's how the brain works. They also have to understand that there are times that we have a tendency, even if we're in that frontal part of the brain and things are going well, we have a tendency to flip our lid and really go from being totally on it to all of a sudden into that emotional state. And again, I'm an acronym guy, so we know F stands for food. I don't know about you guys, I get hangry. Sometimes I get hangry. It's the end of the day, I'm worn down, I've worked all day, I'm coming in the door after working, and I need some food. And I can't be thinking of that, of all the stuff I really need to do, or really I should check on how my wife's day was, I should do this, I can't think of that because my brain is overwhelmed with, my lid is flipped because I'm thinking of the emotional part of my brain. So I got to get some food. When I'm lonely, if I don't have friends, we want students to realize that a natural tendency is for them when they feel lonely that they're going to flip their lid. And so, we want to make sure kids have friends. We want to make sure, as I said earlier, that educators are reaching out to kids right now. We want to make sure that kids are seeing each other via Zoom, that they're having these different situations. Those are key during this time. We know that if we're just plain irritated, that something is getting under our skin, we know that is going to cause us more quickly to flip our lid. And then lastly, we know if we're just pooped out and tired, we're going to flip our lid. And if we're tired, we're not able to access that frontal part of the brain. And I think we can turn to the reading research and know that elementary students that get less than 8 hours of sleep a night show a decrease in at least one grade level in their reading comprehension. And so if kids aren't getting that good night's sleep, they're going to read, struggle more in reading because of not getting the sleep, not because of the ability. So I think it's just another example of how we flip our lid. So those are tendencies. And then, as I talked earlier, a big tendency that we want kids to understand, because it's totally normal. It's totally normal, is that we all get on the mental merry-go-round where we get into these thought traps, or these thought holes where our mind just starts spinning, and we get stuck, and our mind just goes around and around and around and around thinking about this. There are times when something happens, when we get irritated, and we start blaming ourselves. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I can't believe I did that. For some people, that's their go-to tendency, is to blame themselves. For others, their go-to is to blame somebody else. It's their fault. Sadly, I think this is my family would say this is my tendency, is to blame somebody else. A third, thought trap is I have no control, is to believe that you have no control over a situation. So we want to teach kids how to, when that becomes their thought trap, and they start going in that merry-go-round and spinning that and telling them that story over and over again, we want to give them strategies to get out of that. It's going to happen again. Something bad happened, it's going to happen again. We get in this mindset, it's going to happen again. Or this negative self-talk that, boy, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did this. I'm an idiot. And we start telling things to ourselves that we never want somebody to call us, and when we fall into that hole. Another one, I should have done this. I should have done this. If I had done this, this wouldn't have happened. And we beat ourselves up for it. Another thought trap is to start projecting and kind of mind reading. I know they're thinking this about me. I didn't do this. I know they're thinking this about me. And we start, spinning that idea in our head. We start seeing something, and we start thinking, all right, this coronavirus situation is bad. It's going to be bad all summer. I'm not going to have a summer. It's going to be bad. And all of a sudden we start playing that out in our head, and we lose track of the moment. And instead of being in the present time, we get stuck in the future and predicting and thinking ahead that it's going to be so bad. And we make the situation worse. Another thought trap is where we start thinking, okay, nothing good is going to come out of this. There is nothing good. This COVID experience has been terrible. Nothing good is going to happen out of this. It's just a bad thing. My kids are going to be my students aren't going to learn as much. And we start playing that in our head, and we start focusing on all those negative pieces instead of the positives in the situation. And then the last one is kind of this always thinking of everyone's doing this every time, and again, these different thought traps or mental traps that we go into, we start playing this mental merry-go-round, and we need to know that that's a natural tendency. And so it's important for us, as we develop students' social emotional needs and skills, and for them, as they start thinking of what their story is they understand what their tendencies are. Which of those are their tendencies? Opportunities then. So strengths, tendencies, opportunities. What are the opportunities that lie ahead for growth for every student? What do I need to grow? What is an opportunity for me to grow? And I think the number one opportunity that we have with students is for us to help students understand. And the biggest opportunity is for them to start looking at their emotions as data and not a directive. It's just information. As educators, emotions are formative assessment. They're telling us where we are in the moment. They're not an end state. They're where we are in that moment. And as good formative assessment and teaching helps decide and drive our next steps in learning, emotions should drive our next step, in action. And so one of the things that we do to help students and has really helped staff as well, because as much as we talk about each student's having a story, each one of us has a story. And we have to understand our strengths, our tendencies, what our opportunities are. And an opportunity we have is to use this 3-step process, where first we recognize our feelings, the sensations in our body. We start categorizing those then. All right, so here's, I'm feeling frustrated. Or I should say, I'm feeling like, my hands are just tight, and I'm making a fist, and I'm tense. That, and we want to teach kids to recognize that. Then we want them to characterize it. Okay, that feeling is frustration. Okay, so frustration is normal. Everybody gets frustrated at different times. And then step 3 is, how do I strategize? How do I get out of that process? How do I move to the next level? And so this 3-step process of recognize, categorize, strategize helps us slow down and walk through. The recognizing is a huge awareness piece. And where this 3-step process being so important is, it's important for me to recognize my own feelings, my own sensations, and become more aware of those. And there's a self-awareness to that. Then once I say, all right, right now I'm angry. Well, that's the emotion. I've categorized it as angry. Then I have to have compassion for myself and say, okay, anger is normal. Everybody gets angry. Angry is good sometimes, but there's other times it's not. I should say it's productive sometimes, but other times it's not so productive. So I want to be able to categorize that and give myself some self-compassion with that. And then lastly, I want to be able to strategize and come up with a plan. And that management piece of, kind of walking myself through that and understanding how I can now manage my emotions and my emotional state is huge. And this 3-step process is so important from the self, but it's also for the social. As a parent, it's important for me, as I'm working with my family, especially my kids, is, when I start recognizing what's happening to them. I see my son, and I see him as he's working on his science assignment, for example, this morning, and I could see he's getting frustrated, and I can see he's getting up, and he's wanting to walk away and to not attack it. That's an important piece in that social process of social emotional learning, is really being aware of what others are, then categorizing it. Okay, Jack right now is really frustrated because he's not being successful. I'm not going to get mad at Jack for being frustrated. Instead, I need to recognize that and understand, okay, that's a normal emotion that Jack's going through. And then I want to be able to see if I can help, work with Jack and help strategize to get him through those processes, that moment. And so the recognizing is, again, recognizing our thoughts, recognizing our body sensation, and what our action tendencies. One of the students that I talked about earlier is Becca, and Becca, one of the things we worked on with Becca is, her go-to move is to, as she's trying to get better, to continue to excel, her go-to move is, she has a tendency to want to be perfect, and everything has to be perfect. And so, and she drives and drives and drives, and all of a sudden she's up until 2:00 in the morning trying to get that little extra. And what happens is it actually burns her out. So one of the things we're working on is, when she feels that, she talks about how she actually gets this, what some people would say, like a queasy stomach. She actually starts feeling this queasy stomach, and that queasy stomach drives her in a negative way. So we want her to recognize that queasy stomach. And when that happens, to understand, all right, here's what's happening. I'm going too far. Categorizing then, again, is about naming that emotion. And one of the things we can do with students, and again, in the multi-day version of this, we really dive deep into making sure students expand their emotional vocabulary, because the greater someone's emotional vocabulary, the greater chance they are able to to be successful social emotionally. One of the really outstanding educators, Mark Brackett, we talked about his book last week, Permission to Feel, but one of the things he talks about in there is we have to name it to be able to tame it. And so kids have to be able to name their emotion and understand that emotions have a dual purpose, and then think about, what is that emotion telling me I need to do? Fear would be a wonderful emotion right now if a bear came running in my basement door right now. Fear would be a great emotion, because fear would speed up my heart, which would then in turn pump more oxygen through my blood, through my body, which would energize me to get the heck out the other door in the basement. Perfect emotion would be fear right now. Fear, however, if there was a bear, fear, however, would not be a good emotion for me right now as I'm doing this presentation. If I was afraid of what I was going to say, or how I was going to say it, or all these other things, then fear, that quick blood rush, that actually would take the blood away from my brain as it sends it throughout my body, which then takes it away from my prefrontal cortex, where all the good stuff happens. And so I'd be taking it away from there to put it in another part of my body, which would cause me to struggle as I'm doing this presentation. So again, fear has purpose, a powerful purpose sometimes, but on other times it can do some damage to me, or lead me in the wrong way. And so we want kids to understand that. And again, when they understand that, they become more compassionate. Jada right now, we're working on Jada, and I said she's really struggling because of absence of school. And so, Jada, what we're helping her is when she starts feeling that sad because she can't go to school. When she starts feeling down that she's not seeing her friends, when she starts feeling sad, her reaction has been, as she starts feeling sad, that she actually wants to act out to try to get attention. And sadly, she takes out her, her emotions onto one of her little brother. And so we're helping her realize, okay, when you're scared, instead of then turning that feeling of fear into anger, what we want you to do is understand that that's normal. That's normal to feel that way because you don't have your friends right now. Not the best thing to do, though, is to act out toward your little brother. What we have to do is just relax with it. And then the last piece, the last component, then again, in that 3-step process is, coming up with a strategy. What do I need to get back on track and to my destination, where I need to go? What tools can I use? And so, for Becca, with her struggles right now and her perfectionism, we've used a little mantra that I'll explain in a little bit, called the I can statement, that she uses, and that refocuses her. With Jada, we're using something called box breathing, which I'll talk about in a minute. For Mateo, one of the things we've learned from Mateo that really helps him with his anger, he also grew up in a situation where he had a lot of trauma in the house. And so one of the strategies that we use with him is something called tapping. And so I'll talk about those, but we want to develop kids' abilities, and it's our opportunity to help them, is to recognize those feelings and sensations they have, to categorize them, to realize that those emotions are okay, and then to come up with strategies. And so there's some tools that we can use that can really help. Again, here's the I can statements that we use with Becca. One of the things we help her, and actually we've used them with all 3 of the kids, but it's been really successful with Becca, is for her to, when she starts feeling that perfectionistic piece, is, okay, I can inhale and exhale. I can calm my body and mind, and we have her just try to calm herself with some deep breaths in and out. I can accept that everyone has our good days and bad days, and that, if I don't get for Becca, if I don't get a perfect score on this test, life's going to be okay. It's not going to kill my scholarship opportunity. And then, okay, I can navigate forward in a positive way. And so we teach them this little mantra as one strategy to help. other strategies that you can use, and one of my, are some technology strategies and some things that you can use during the school year, but also now during this period of remote learning. One of them is a wonderful free tool, and it's called CloseGap, closegap.org. And it's a free tool that teachers can sign up, where kids go in essence, they go into the program and they recognize how they're feeling, or, um, categorize their emotion, and come up with a strategy to go forward. So Close Gap aligns perfectly with our three-step process. Another tool that aligns with our three-step process is from Mark Brackett. This guy, I feel like everybody should read his book, Permission to Feel It. And he has an app called the Mood Meter. And it's a tool that, again, Becca, who's the sophomore in high school, is using right now as well. And the Mood Meter is an app she has on her phone. And you go in, each person can go in, they plot how they're, recognize the feelings they have in their body. They recognize on this chart where they're at in their feelings, categorize it when they recognize kind of their energy level and their level of pleasantness. It kind of plots and it says, okay, here's your emotion. And then they are able to come up with a strategy. And the app actually has some strategies that kids can, or adults can use. So it's a great tool. Another awesome tool is from Class Catalyst. And it's an awesome tool. So we have strengths, tendencies, opportunities, resources. And so we want kids to also think of, okay, here's my strength, here's my tendency, here's my opportunity to use this three-step process. What resources do I have to really assist them in my learning, in my being, and to be more social, emotionally literate? And so the biggest resource that we have at our disposal is one that isn't used enough, I don't think, in the area of social emotional learning, and it is, to me, the key piece. When the kids were little, we took them to Disney, and my son, when we went to Disney, we had this little card, and the card allowed us 5 fast passes where we could jump to the front of the line. And so we get to a ride, and my son was like, okay, let's use the fast pass. Well, pretty soon, obviously, we were out of the fast pass. And he said, we should have a fast pass for everything. And this vagus nerve, if we realize the power of this vagus nerve in our body, it's basically our fast pass to calming ourselves down. And it when stimulated, this vagus nerve in our body really puts us in a rest and digest mode. It kind of moves us out of that fight flight response into a rest and digest mode. And so there are things that we can do. This vagus nerve runs through our body. There's some things we can do that really activate that. And this kind of leads back to those strategies. Belly breathing is a huge activation of the vagus nerve. If we put our hands, our right hand on the top of our chest and our left hand on our stomach, and we were to breathe in and breathe out very slowly, most people would see that their right hand on the top of their chest is moving a little bit more. What we want is to shift that so that right hand is really is pretty much still, but it's the belly that's going in and out. Those deep belly breaths, impact that vagus nerve, and all of a sudden starts putting our body into this rest and digest, meditating in the single pointed concentration puts our body into, stimulates the vagus nerve and relaxes us. Mindfulness helps us. This EFT tapping I'll show you here in a second is a huge tool that we can use to help us. Havening is another great tool we can use, and havening, a couple different ways you can do it. Most, the way that we've used it the most, and one of the ways that we actually use it with this young girl Jada that I was talking about, is that you put your hands across your body, and you just give some firm pressure to your shoulders and your bicep area, and just push down strongly. And what happens is, by crossing your arms across your body, pushing down that in that manner, it again, that pressure on your body stimulates that vagus nerve and starts to relax us. Coloring actually starts to calm us. There's kind of double effect. Number one, when you're coloring, generally your arm is moving somewhat across the midline of your body, which has a slight impact on your vagus nerve. But also when you're coloring, that single pointed concentration slows you down. It is a great thing for kids. Laughing. How many of you have, maybe been in a stressed out mood and your go-to is to watch a comedy at night just to relax you? I can hear my dad, as I say this, and his big belly laughs, although, we'd be in a theater and everybody in the theater hears my dad, because he's laughing so loud. But that, he comes out and he's like totally energized because, again, that stimulates that vagus nerve. Singing helps. Humming helps. Yoga and the movement from yoga helps. Sensory pathways and schools help. Just type of those kinds of movements, and then that physical connection helps too. So many ways to do that. And we'll share the PowerPoint, but the one that I am a huge proponent of is this box breathing, where you inhale, hold, exhale, hold, and you go in this box. And 2 minutes of box breathing, and again, there's an app for it, really, really calms you down. The breathing buddies. A first grade teacher I know, she started during the school year with breathing buddies with her students. Now during remote learning, one of their daily checkoffs is to do breathing buddies. EFT tapping is something that I talked about that we're using with Mateo because of his experience with trauma, and EFT tapping, kids have a script that they repeat to themselves, and there's different trigger points or pressure points in their body that they tap, and again, send some signals to the brain that calms them, and you can look that up. A friend of ours who developed the Classroom Catalyst program I showed earlier, she does cotton ball breathing, and where you just put a cotton ball on your hand and you just blow it and you try to get it to not fall off your fingertips, and just that concentration on the blowing, again, stimulates that vagus nerve. Huge fan for students is in Vimeo, the counterpart for YouTube. On Vimeo, there's videos from Yo Mind, and there's this awesome guy. We've seen these videos help from anywhere from first grade on up through high school, and there's a series of 5 or 6 videos, and this gentleman walks you through some different activities that again help stimulate that vagus nerve and calm. So a lot of strategies. The Calm app, Headspace app, Mind Yeti has a meditation that you can do. Go Noodle has a mindfulness thing, and again, these are important for us to understand that they're resources for us and for our students to calm themselves, and as strategies. They're also great for us, if we're in a Zoom call and we're 10 minutes into in a Zoom presentation with kids, pause, do some mindfulness, get them to relax, get them to focus before moving on. Things like that help. If you're looking for more of a true program that helps with that, I can't more highly recommend the Go Zen program. It's just a phenomenal program. And then all the fidgets that we use in schools, and the trauma tools that we have in school, the rubber balls and the rubber pieces where you stretch them, the stretch bands, all of those things, help in your regulation of yourself. And then lastly, we talked about strengths, tendencies, opportunities, resources. The last one is yearnings. We want kids to understand, as part of their story, what do they need? What do they want? What do they desire? And with that, we know that all of us, we all have 3 basic needs that we want. We all yearn for autonomy, belonging, and competence. And so autonomy is having that choice or say, that sense of control over things. We know from an online learning study that was just done by Edutopia that teachers have reported that students during this online remote learning experience do more work when they have autonomy over what the outcome of the work is. And so think projects that are more open-ended, where we can use our own, follow our own interests, that helps us. That sense of autonomy is something that helps us. Belonging, that feeling that we're cared for, is a huge need. And then the feeling of competence, that we're being effective, that we're making success, that we're getting feedback. I think, so many students are struggling right now because they're doing remote learning activities at home, and they're not getting any feedback on that. And so that just leaves kids wondering, okay, how do I do? Am I competent? Am I doing okay? What am I doing? And so we have that natural need for that. So some things that we can do are starting to assign some projects that are more autonomous. The Genius Hour and Passion projects, I think, are awesome because they're totally self-guided. And as I talk to educators around the country, that is one of the big things that we have success with. Many schools have tied the SEL aspect with this autonomy and have given students writing prompts for the week. So Monday, My Strengths Monday, Tuesday, TED Talk Tuesdays. This is a middle school that I'm working with in Tennessee, and what they've done is the teachers basically Googled best TED Talks for middle schoolers. And there's a whole list that they give to students, and they say, all right, every Tuesday, I want you to pick one of those TED Talks, watch that TED Talk, and write about it and how it impacts your life. And so things like that are great. Wednesday, what went well Wednesday? They're just talking about something that went well for them during the week. Thankful Thursday, something that they're grateful for. Friday, Fantastic Friday, something the best part of the week. Some of these simple projects like this are very autonomous, and they're open-ended and give students freedom. As far as belonging in relationships, kids want to connect with their teachers and their peers. We know that. They also want to feel that they're part of something greater than themselves. So some of the best learning experiences we've seen over this time are service learning projects where teachers have challenged kids to come up with a project to help the community. How will you help the nurse at the local hospital who is working so hard? How can you help her? And have the kids come up with projects for that. Design thinking projects, the higher levels, letters to these first responders and to the nursing homes. Those things create a sense of belonging and help us feel like we have more purpose. And then competence. I think one of the best ways for competence, for us to feel successful, we talked about how, kids want to feel that they're doing well. They want to get feedback. But one of the best things we can do is do goal setting. And obviously I'm an acronym guy, I've said that. And so this WHOOP goal setting process is the best goal setting process, in my opinion, developed with the people at characterlab.org, Angela Duckworth's foundation. And basically the WHOOP goal setting has students set out what their wish is, what an outcome is they'd like, what an obstacle is that's in their way, and then they set up a plan. And what is so powerful for this, as opposed to most types of goal setting, and where it really helps lead to a student's feeling of confidence, is that typically we do a SMART goal, and SMART goals, in my opinion, really are useless because we've set a number and we're always chasing that number, and we're not focused on the process. And when a struggle comes up, we don't know what to do or really how to solve it because we're just chasing that number. With WHOOP goal setting, what happens is you actually come up with kind of an if-then statement where you're going to identify your obstacle and then what your plan is to overcome it. And that mental contrasting, they call, is really the heart and soul of WHOOP goal setting. And it's just so powerful. Another great tool is this 100-second mental workout. And again, we'll share the PowerPoint presentations. If you email me, I'll send you all of this. And so we want to really focus on students understanding and learning their own story, their strengths, their tendencies, the opportunities, how we can use that 3-step process to help, what resources are available, and we want to give them tools and strategies to activate that vagus nerve to help them, and then what their yearnings are, and how do we help address those needs of autonomy, belonging, and competence. Those are the big things we need. And so with that, I'll pause with a quick story. Like many of you, can't wait to get out of my basement. Been in here way too long. Can't wait to travel. And one of the places that I love going with my family is up to Minnesota, to Wabasha, Minnesota, which is where this movie Grumpy Old Men was filmed. And it's one of our favorite places to go. And when we go there as a family, we always go to the National Eagle Center. And the National Eagle Center is right there on the Mississippi River, and you're looking out of the Mississippi River and you see the eagles and flying in the background, swooping down and getting fish. I mean, it's just gorgeous. But inside the Eagle Center, you literally get just feet away from the eagles. And just this beautiful, majestic creature is just so awesome. And every time we go, my kids absolutely just love it. We got to go to the Eagle Center, no matter what their age. Well, we've been there a couple times, and we'd been there a couple times when my son noticed for the first time that all of the eagles that are there were injured in some way, and one of the eagles fell off the gentleman's arm down to the ground, and as it fell down to the ground, it was trying to get back on the gentleman's arm, and it was flapping as hard as it could with its wing, but that wing was damaged, and that eagle just went around in circles. And it was so sad to see this eagle as it went around in a circle. And my son looked up at me with his beautiful little blue eyes, and he said, "Dad, an eagle needs two wings to soar." And that hit me so deeply, because an eagle does need two wings to soar, and our kids need two wings to soar. They need an academic wing and a non-academic wing, that social emotional wing. And our problem is that too many schools chasing that fruit of the academics, and our kids are going around in a circle. And we have to build not only that academic wing, but also the social emotional wing if we're going to have kids soar. So what next? Unleash your awesomeness. Thanks for staying with me. I went long. Sorry, Darlene. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'll share resources from this presentation, and be glad to help you. And I'll answer any questions if we have any time left. I'm sorry, Darlene.
No, you did great.
All right, so we do have a few questions. Thank you, Greg. The first one, building on your presentation last week about connections, in light of the historically persistent academic achievement gap evident among African American and Latino students when compared with their white and Asian peers, how do you see the role of culture proficiency in addressing the advent of authentic connections with marginalized students?
Ooh, that's a whole webinar in itself. I think one of the important pieces that we do is, again, following with this STORY acronym, is putting time into learning each child's story, understand, and as well as understanding our own. For many of us with, who have sheltered backgrounds and come from more of a white privileged experience, we don't know what we don't know. We're looking at things from a certain lens, and we have to take a step back and look what our tendencies are and how we might judge things. And so, I think one of the things we can start to do is to really understand who we are, where we are, and then really start to get into the homes of the other students. I think one of the schools that I'm working with in Nashville, where they've made their biggest growth in equity, is when they started having teachers do home visits, and that just totally changed the perspective on how they worked with students and how they saw students. And I think we have to really know ourselves and understand that when we get to that acronym with resources, your culture is a resource that you have. If you're a second language student, the fact that you have a second language, that is a resource, and we have to start looking at it as such. And I think that's one of the first ways that start to break that down.
Thank you. Next question. What are your thoughts on teachers maintaining professional boundaries while still being flexible on all the technology platforms connecting to students?
I think professional boundaries with that. I think there's so many ways to go with that one. Things I could hit. So I think one of the biggest things I think is I'm more for things that I think the phone calls are huge important. I think can do that from using dialing it from a Google Meets dialing it from a Rival 5 system or something like that that doesn't have your own phone number. Some of that helps with that. I think this is a unique time. We have to, you know, be a little bit more comfortable with going out on that edge and knowing that we're doing it for the right reason. I don't think we can, hide behind the, that distance and saying, okay, I'm not going to call kids because I don't want them to have my cell phone. No, really, kids need to be connected. Let's find another way to do it. And so, I think that's an important piece. I hope I answered that.
Thank you, Greg. And here's our last question of the evening. Please provide recommendations about the planning process and design possibilities related to students' return to school following remote learning.
So we're going to talk a lot more about the planning, later. I think in our next webinar. I think one of the important things with the planning process is we don't have closure to this year, and so one of the things that I think schools should start considering is how are they going to have closure from this year at the start of next year. So several schools that I've been meeting with are going to have basically a flashback day. The first day of school is not going to be in the new class. The first day of school is going to be with last year's teacher. And they're basically going to do closure from last year before they move forward. I think, one of the ideas in my book is something that we've done in my district for 8 years and 7 years is the first 3 days of school have been all about relationship building and no curriculum, no instruction, just focused on those connections. And I think, regardless of, again, we could talk all day about that planning. I think number one, we have to think about how we give closure to this last year, because there's going to be kids that need it. And then how do we start developing those relationships right away? Because I think more than any year, it's going to be important for us to understand each student's story. And there's some big pre-assessment that goes on. We can't assume, kids are coming from different things. And so I think it's going to be important that we start with those relationships, get kids back into the game, get them working together, get our routines established, those types of things early. And that has to be our number one goal. Again, that's that emotional part of the brain. Let's get that nailed down. Let's focus on that root of relationships, and then let's worry about the fruit and what those academic contents are. But I think planning wise, we gotta plan on those relationships, and a lot of habits are going to be built in the 6 months that we're off, and we've got to build some new habits, remind students of habits that they had before, and that comes by that intentional relationship building to start the year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. That was awesome. Thought-provoking, practical tools and tips. That was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. And I really love that, the story about the wings. I don't think I'll ever forget that. That is just really cool. So I appreciate that. And to all of our guests, and thank you for joining us tonight. And please stay tuned for our session 3. And it is titled Knowing Leads to Growing, the Power of Relationships in School and Life. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of this evening. And again, thanks to all those great teachers out there for everything that you do every day on behalf of children. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.